Hello, I'm Peter Freer. I'm the founder of Play Attention. My background is education, and Play Attention's been around for about 30 years. I started this a long time ago, and it was meant to increase executive function, but that's only one part of the story today. What we want to do is investigate the role of executive function in academic achievement. That'll be the primary goal of the webinar today. As I ask almost every time I do a webinar now, if you would, in order to keep your attention on the webinar, there are two primary reasons to do this. One is that we need attention to learn. And there is another reason that I'll reveal a little bit later in the webinar about why you should be demonstrating good attention right now. So to do that, one of the easiest ways is to lay down your cell phone. If you're watching me on your cell phone, perhaps you would turn off your messaging, right? Or you turn off the TV, whatever is distracting you, because we are a very distracted culture anymore. So to get the most out of the webinar, I'm just asking you to put down the distractions and let's share some time together as if we were friends sitting in your living room and just talking away. I think the biggest conundrum we have as parents is, why is my child failing? And I know you see flashes of intelligence, you see flashes of attention, you see flashes of good performance. But then at times there is total failure. And this is the perplexing, I think, instance, I think, that most parents are subjected to, and they just don't understand. For instance, perhaps you've sat with your child to learn multiplication tables, and you go over it, you use flashcards, you go over it. The test is tomorrow. And they do well with you. Looks like they got it. They take the test the following day, and they get a very low grade, or they didn't, in general, just didn't do well. And you thought, we had it. Where did it go? So this is related to executive function. I'll make it make sense as we go through. If you are sensing that your child is bright, but still falling behind, there is a reason, typically. And we will discuss that. How this affects academic performance, and then what you can do to help foster strong executive function in your child. And this was my major goal, because although I have no children, I had a child that I started teaching my second year. His name was John, and John was bright and funny, but the other teachers who had him asked that I take him. I was the only male teacher in that grade, and they asked me if I would take John because none of them had been successful, and the principal agreed that a male teacher should have him. It made no sense to me, but I said, sure, I'd be delighted to have him. So I placed John close to my desk, and that way I could use proximity control, develop a good relationship, model things for him. And we were reasonably successful. I had increased his math scores, I had increased his reading scores. He was getting along better in the classroom. But John's parents were not successful at home, and this is in the mid 1980s. And so when they couldn't control him the way they wanted to, they actually hit him with a belt a few times, which was a common practice in the rural mountains of Appalachia where I was teaching. That didn't work. So one day he came in and he put his head down on his desk, and his eyes were bloodshot. I noticed when he put his head down, I said, "Are you sick?" And he said, "No, no, I'm not sick." I said, "So why is your head down?" He said, "I'm on medicine." And I said, "Medicine? So you're not sick and you're taking medicine?" He goes, "I don't know. My mom told me I needed it." So they had put him on Ritalin. They placed him on Ritalin. It just never could get they could not find the right dosage for him. So he was so out of it, to put it colloquially. He was really not able to be the same John. He was not happy. He was not funny. And I was struggling with it myself internally. I just felt it was so heartbreaking. And that's when I decided I would develop something, having a science background, physics background, mathematics, and computer programming. I thought I'll develop something for him. And that's where Play Attention came from. So it was to teach him how to harness his executive functions. Now, it took me 6 years. So John was well through the school system by that time. And I noticed that he had been in and out of jail, was not being very successful in any of his life endeavors. So it motivated me. And that is why Play Attention came into being. It's all about executive function. So I'm going to explain it technically. Now, many of us here today actually know already what executive function is. And so bear with me. Many of us here have no idea what it is. So we're rather a heterogeneous group. In this case, I'm going to explain the technical side, but I'm also going to define it a little bit right after this. I'm going to present it so that it makes sense on just a human side, so that we understand it. If it's all too much, the technical side, we'll understand it a little bit better secondarily. But let's look at it in the first place. Executive function is actually like a suitcase kind of container. All of these type of cognitive functions are in that container. That container is held together by glue. And that glue is attention. Attention holds all this together. And let's explain how that works. So these skills help us organize and plan so we can successfully operate throughout the day. These are the skills it takes to do that. Working memory, so that I can play with data in my mind. As a child, I may go, I have $1. If I buy that chocolate milk at lunch, I'm going to have this much left over, and then they calculate. That's working memory using some mathematics. Emotion regulation. If you find that your child is subjected to a minor infraction, something minor happens, and then they explode in a thunderstorm of emotion. This is poor emotion regulation. It's a challenge for them at times, especially if they're ADHD. Mental flexibility is my ability to change according to the circumstances. If you and I have something planned, or let's say you and your son or your daughter have planned to go to the store tomorrow, and it's very exciting for them. And at the last minute, you have a meeting come up, and you say, I can't do this today, but I will be able to do it tomorrow. And they have a complete meltdown. And you think, why? We're going to go. Why are they having a meltdown? So that's mental flexibility. If they're challenged, that happens. Is this resonating with anyone here? Hand up if this makes sense to you. These are the people that these are the skills that ADHD students often present or are challenged by. They present poorly, or they are challenged by them. Task initiation. This is a very strong point for both children and adults. If you are an adult that has ADHD, and that's why you're here today, then you might find that you'll initiate 30 tasks and you finish 0. Make sense? That's task initiation. If we have a poor or weak task initiation as a cognitive skill, that creates problems for us. Organization and planning. That relates back to task initiation a little bit. But if I have a job and I can't organize what I'm supposed to do, I can't prioritize, I can't even do my homework, or I couldn't even finish that assignment my boss gave me, that's a problem. And then inhibitory control is impulsivity. Can I stop or just curb my impulsivity and do things without being impulsive? This is, although it seems like a minor skill set, and especially like inhibitory control, well, it's impulsivity. It's not a big deal. It's been studied heavily. How many people here have heard of the marshmallow test? Anyone here? Just a few of us. Okay, a few of us have heard of it. For those of you who have not heard of it, the marshmallow test, I think, began all the way in the 60s, perhaps maybe the 70s. And it just was a psychologist um, who set a camera in a room on a child. And the psychologist would walk in. The only thing in the room is the camera. They're sitting in a chair at a table. And the psychologist would come in and say, I'm going to give you this marshmallow. I know that you like marshmallows. So here's one. Now, I'm going to have to leave for a second or two to go get a bag of marshmallows. But if you have not eaten this marshmallow by the time I return, you can have two marshmallows. And that is a struggle for some children. So they videotaped all of this. And one could see the students that had executive function skills. They were looking away, not looking at it. So they have decided that impulsivity could be controlled by just not looking at it. It's out of my mind. I don't have to deal with it. Others that had poorer inhibitory control would grab the marshmallow, smell it, put it back down. Then they'd pick it back up and they'd lick it and put it back down. Then they would pick it up and just take a little nibble off it and put it back down. And then on the next trial, they would just go ahead and put it all, stuffing it all in their mouth at one time. So the psychologist, I think this was done and originally at Stanford University. I think they followed them for close to 30 some years, if not longer, to see what their outcomes were. Those that had good inhibitory control, good impulsive control, and those that could not control it. And they found that the students that had poor impulse control, poor inhibitory control, actually had higher use of drugs. They had poorer academic scores and tended not to stay in school. They had poorer jobs. They made less money. Overall, were not as happy with their lives, as opposed to those that had good inhibitory control. So while we think this is a minor thing, that maybe all of these are minor skills, they all reflect upon each other. I'll talk about that in more detail in just a moment. They are all related. And if one is challenging, then it tends to undermine all the rest of them. And I'll discuss that as well, so we can understand this. So this might be a little bit of assistance for you in understanding why these things happen, why my child is bright, but I'm not seeing it consistently. I see sparks of it, but it's not what I think this child, the child's potential is. Or it may be someone that you live with as an adult. It may be a family member. It may be your spouse or partner. You probably understand this now that I'm mentioning these things and bringing them to light to discuss today. So we often label these students, right? If they're children, we label them as lazy. And let's say it. If we're adults, we get labeled as lazy, forgetful, unmotivated, oppositional, or defiant. But the truth of the matter is that with ADHD children now, 90% have executive function challenges. And this is exactly why I developed Play Attention in the first place. Because if we build executive functions, we can change lives. And that's what we're talking about today. How do we foster executive function as a caregiver, as a teacher, as a parent? The reason that they are behind, right, they lag developmentally, is most likely due to lower amounts of brain matter. They typically have smaller volumes, and it's just a developmental issue. Does that mean that they are forever bound to never be able to change, is the question. And the answer to that is absolutely no. The answer is that we can change throughout our early stages of life, all the way up through our senior stages of life. The brain is an incredible organ. It will change no matter what age you are, according to the amount of stimulation and the right amount of stimulation that you get. This is called neuroplasticity, our ability to make changes. And that's one of the greatest things about being human, is that this brain can change. Now, if they have this developmental lag, that means they are behind their peers by about 30 to 40%. Now, if we do not foster, teach, provide them these cognitive skills that comprise executive function, then this will carry on until through adulthood, where they will struggle. And you may be one of those persons here right now. So if you're an 8-year-old and you are in this 30 to 40% lag, you'll have the skills, executive function skills of a 5 or 6-year-old or less. If you're a 12-year-old, you'll have the executive function skills of a 9 to 10-year-old. So now you're beginning to see, does anyone here notice that your child may seem less mature than their chronological age should determine? If it does, if you've seen that, you can raise your hand. Very good. That's a lot of us here today. So what we need to realize, though, is that no one is born with strong executive function. We all have the potential to develop it, but we're not born. It doesn't magically come to us just floating into our brains through the air. It just does not happen. It is dependent upon certain factors, and let's talk about those. It is an interplay, a delicate interplay between our genes and our experiences. So executive function is dependent on what we're passed from our parents to us, and the experiences we get from early childhood, perhaps even in the womb, on up through our lives. Now, if you have genes that have presented ADHD in your relatives, and now you have it or your child has it, does that mean that you are stuck? Does that mean that you cannot change? Can anyone answer that? Remember, this is all a careful interplay between our genetic makeup, right? And that's right. Leslie says, no, it doesn't mean that we're stuck. That's correct. We are not stuck. This is super, super important. I'll give you a good example of this. Does anyone here know anything about tennis? Right? There's a great player, even though you don't know tennis, he is so famous. His name is Rafa Nadal. Spanish player, perhaps the best clay court player of all time. Now, Rafa was born right-handed, but he loved tennis, and his whole family were actually very good at tennis, and his uncle was a tennis coach. And his uncle said, if you play left-handed, then you will give most other players, you have a significant advantage over most other players. You will give them a problem on the court. But Rafa was right-handed. His genes made him right-handed. His uncle said, let's play left-handed. So from a very young age, he played left-handed. You should see the size of his left arm. His left arm is 2 sizes larger than his right arm. And he is right-handed. And he plays better than almost any other player in the world. Now, he is on his final years of tennis. He's only like 36 or something like that. And he's getting to an age now where he's going to have to stop because it's too tough on his body. But the fact of the matter is, his genes were expressed as right-handed. His uncle asked him to play left-handed, and he became a tennis prodigy with a left hand playing. So absolutely, we can rewire ourselves. Absolutely. I hope this makes sense. Now, the experiences that reshaped his genes, he relied on from his uncle. The earliest learning in our lives, and that's why I put this picture of a father and son up here. The earliest learning we do in our lives is called observational learning. That means whether you realize it or not, your child is learning from you, whether you realize it or not. So there may be some things that you now will understand through today's presentation that you may not like when I say them. They may make you feel uncomfortable or resentful toward me, or they may just be something you haven't noticed, and this will make you notice it. Remember earlier when I started the presentation, I started the webinar, I said, the reason I wanted you to put down things that distract you is not only because they do distract you, but it is because you are the model for your child. They watch you. If you are playing with your cell phone while they're doing their homework, you are that model. Not a good model at that point. Not an appropriate model. If you can't figure out how to organize and prioritize, they will watch your model. So this is very important for us to understand right now. The grandparents, the parents, everyone around them as they're being reared are their major, here's the modern word, they are their major influencers. They watch that. Now, if you give them one of those little screens, you give them a cell phone or a tablet early on, and there was a great study that came out last year. It was published in a major journal. New York Times even had an article on it. It was done in Japan. And they monitored children who had been given tablets and cell phones early on, I think about a year old or less. They found that these children had significant lags in their ability to read and think and express themselves. That tells you a bit about what these screens do, but it also tells them about what they do to us as human beings, adult human beings. They change the way our brains are wired. They change the way children's brains are wired. And it is not necessarily good. And I know you love them. I know that you may be watching me on one of them. And it is a powerful tool. But everything in moderation. Everything in moderation. And the American Academy of Pediatrics suggests that before the age of 2, their guideline is 0 screen time. Before the age of 2, 0 screen time. That's how much they think it affects brain development. Very important information for you. So what do we do? How do we foster it? Good executive function. If I don't, if I am allowing them to be on a phone, or they're watching a lot of TV, or they're playing a lot of video games, how do I foster this? This is very important, and we will discuss this as we move forward. So challenges with executive function obviously are impacted by ADHD, right? 90% of the kids that have it have executive function challenges. That's due from developmental lag and several other factors, but gives you a good idea. Stress and anxiety. Has anyone here experienced stress and anxiety through COVID? Our levels went through the ceiling. They kept taking surveys. How stressed is the American public? How stressed is the global public? We, as a globe, I don't think have ever been as stressed as we were over the last couple of years, except perhaps maybe World War II, where we were all fighting with, people basically in our own backyards. Whether it was Hawaii during World War II or London, getting bombed by Germany. I mean, that was really stressful. But we are among the peak of stress right now. And we're now, the polls, the recent polls that I've read say that it is reducing, but we still are very, very stressed. And adverse experiences can also impact executive function. And executive function remembers that careful interplay between our experiences, our genes, and so forth. But let's say we're in a toxic relationship. That could affect my executive function. If I experience trauma, something terrible happens, a terrible car accident, the death of a loved one, that can impair my executive function. It's a tenuous balance. And what I want to do for those of us here who are not interested in the technical side, that you're sitting there going, oh, this is so over my head. I just can't figure this out. We're going to make it very simple so that it will resonate with you, I think. So for those of you who don't like that technical description, let's picture your brain as an orchestra. This will make it fairly simple for you, and it's fun. It'll get us to actually understand a little bit more about it, even if we know about it already. So if we picture our brains as an orchestra, remember we had all of these certain segments in here in executive function, right? The orchestra has those type of segments. Everything in executive function is held together by attention. So let's see how this looks in an orchestra. Well, an orchestra has sections. Just like the slide before, they have sections. Executive function has all these things that have to operate together to make us function and execute our day happily. An orchestra has to have all of these sections of instruments working together under the glue of the conductor to make music, to make beautiful music. Now, these sections actually look quite simple, don't they? There's percussion, but it's incredibly complex, right? Percussion involves over 100 instruments. You all probably are aware of cymbals and snare drums and timpani, or maybe a xylophone or marimba. Even a tambourine is a percussion instrument. And even those wind chimes are percussion instrument. So percussion is a very large section. All of those things have to come together to make beautiful music in that one section. So even though this seems rather simple, there's a lot to it. Let's go down to the brass section where we could look at trumpets, trombones, tubas, right? French horns. Those have to come together in that section. Strings. Right? Oh, by the way, did you know piano is a percussion instrument? That might be something you could remember just for the day. Strings, violas, violins, cellos, bass instruments in the strings. Woodwinds, comprised of oboes, clarinets, flutes, piccolos. So we have all of those in there as well. And all of these have to come together, just like the previous slide. If we're talking about executive function, all of these have to work well for us to function on a daily basis. And all of these sections have to work well for the conductor to make music, right? So executive function is a lot like your brain's conductor. If you have been to an orchestra and you've seen them play, a symphony orchestra play something, typically before they get started, it's chaos on the stage. You hear musicians practicing their pieces for the night. People are shuffling around their music. They're talking. They're tuning their instruments. But then the conductor comes out, and the conductor raises that baton and taps it. Then they all start to synchronize. They all start and play, and they play together. This is exactly the function of executive function in the brain, right? So now what happens when you have a good conductor But let's go down here to the strings section, right next to him on the right. We go down to the string section. What happens to the sound of the music if the string section is challenged? They're not playing on time. They're not playing in key. They may not be playing the same music. What happens to the overall performance of the orchestra? It goes down. They're not playing optimally. What happens if we compound that and we look to the very back of this picture and we see the timpani and a big bass drum over there? What happens if those sections fail to play up to par? They're challenged. It affects the overall performance of the orchestra. The music doesn't sound good. It doesn't really even make music at times. Now, so if you can equate this to the way your brain perhaps is functioning, or you can equate it to the way your child's brain is functioning, this might make some sense to you now without being terribly technical on executive performance or executive function. Is this making sense at all? Raise your hand if it's starting to resonate or if you understand what we're talking about here. Thank you. Thank you. That's very helpful. So you can think about it quite easily. All of these certain components have to come together just as they do in the brain. And this helps us perform well as a human being. Now, there are indicators that you probably have seen, but now you'll know to equate them with what we've just been talking about. So let's talk about the indicators. Impulse control, we mentioned that before. They have a hard time taking turns. They rush through their work. They may push another child out of the way at the water fountain, just not even realizing they've just done it. That's impulse control. We've talked about how this affects us overall over the long term of our lives. Emotional control. They overreact. They can't take you talking or criticizing them. Emotional thunderstorms often occur. These are challenges in executive function. Flexible thinking. They get easily frustrated. They have difficulties in transitioning. This you'll commonly see if it's your child. You'll see it when they move up from sixth grade to a little bit higher, right? Or seventh grade. They move out of fifth grade. They're going up to middle school, and now all of their classes previously had been in one room. So they got math, reading, science, all of that one room. Now they go to middle school. They're traveling from class to class. They have to transition. And that is where you really see them start talking about it being more difficult for them. They hate school now. They don't understand what's going on. And this is the trouble when we have a challenge with flexible thinking. Transition is very difficult. They get easily frustrated because things have changed and they're not easy to adapt to their thinking. Working memory. They can't remember instructions. You may say, go to your bedroom, put your pajamas on, brush your teeth, get ready for bed. You go up an hour later, they're sitting on the end of the bed playing a Game Boy. They did hear you say, go to your bedroom. Did they process anything else? No. Was it in their working memory? Weren't able to put it in working memory and use it. So these kinds of things, again, are indicators that we are having challenges in executive function. Self-monitoring, and this is true all the way up into adulthood. If you're an ADHD adult here today, you may actually take note of this, right? We don't review our work very well before we turn it in. And I don't understand how behavior affects other people, right? If this is you, and this will greatly affect your personal relationships. You may have noticed that. You may have wondered why up to this point. It does, right? But if you don't review your work before turning it in, oftentimes your boss is really upset with you. Why did you even bother? If you've heard things like this, why did you even bother turning this in? You haven't checked any of it. It's worthless to me unless you check it, right? Or you do something, right, that is an inappropriate behavior for that, but you don't even understand how it affects other people. You have poor self-monitoring. That's an executive function, right? It's a cognitive skill which forms executive function. Planning and prioritizing. We do not know what parts of a project are important. If you sit there and you question yourself, how do I even get started on this? I don't know how to plan for this. Then you will understand that your child has ADHD. They're doing the same thing. And remember, they learn through you. They absolutely learn by watching you and modeling you. And so some of the things that they do, you may have passed along inadvertently, may have passed along to them. Task initiation, putting off tasks, let's say you have a huge assignment, and this may count for you, it may account for your child's behavior. You have a huge assignment. You wait till 2 days before the assignment is due, maybe the night before, and you try to get it all done in one pop. And this kind of behavior travels with you throughout your lifetime. You may have found that you did that if you went to higher level education. You may find that you did it there. You may have survived it. You may not have, and it may have been very frustrating for you. But now you're doing it at work. And if we have to redirect the child several times before they can get started, that's task initiation as well. If you're struggling with homework and you have to constantly redirect them, this is very, very important. This is a problem with executive function, or the skills, the cognitive skills that comprise executive function. Organization. If you have an ADHD child, you know that their organizational skills typically are very, very poor. You can go into their bedroom and you will find that out very quickly. You can look in their backpack, you find it out quickly. You look in their desk and you'll find that out quite quickly. But that can also affect the way that they process. If I can't organize my external world, I cannot organize my thought internally, typically. There's a direct connection there. So organization is a huge cognitive skill. So they seem all minor, don't they? But what it definitely results in is inconsistency and poor results. So let's go back to what I talked about initially. And that was that, let's say we were practicing multiplication tables. We go over them with flashcards with our child. They have them that night. They're performing very well. They go in for the test the following day. They come home with a very poor grade. You know, what happened? You have these. How could you score like this? And it's bewildering to us as a parent. You're so bright. How could you possibly do this? And now we're frustrated. And they're equally frustrated because they don't understand either. You went over it with them. They knew they had it. And then you said, well, what happened to him? I don't know. I don't know. So this inconsistency is something that is apparent to both of us, but we don't know how to change it. Well, now we know this is the result of executive function challenges. The parts of my orchestra are not playing well together. One section is too weak. Remember, if one section is weak in the orchestra, the entire music that comes out is not going to be good because they're all interrelated. Is this making sense to you? Thank you. All right. Thank you very much. So one of the ways to find out what executive function skills are weakest within you or your child or your client is to take an assessment. And there are many that you can take to do this. At Play Attention, we use 3 of them. There is an ADHD assessment that is right on the website. You can just take it. And basically, when you go through it, it will say, okay, here are the weaknesses, and this is where Play Attention would fit in to help you with them. But we also have independent ones as well. And One is called the brief, right? It means the rating index for executive function. It's a basic rating index of executive function. That's the acronym, brief. And so it will tell you where your child is on the scale with its peers so that you understand where they're weakest in their executive function and their where they're strongest. So you can use that to tell. We also have what's called the focus assessment, which it looks at the basic four constructs of attention. So you know, and then it gives you a standardized score so that you would understand where you or your child falls in line with your peers. So I think that's important to have. You can, if you would like to discuss that with someone at Play Attention so that they can get you those assessments, you can do them all at home. You can just type in assessment and then you'll receive an email saying, here's how you can get these assessments. But that might help you having more, being equipped with more information, more data gives us usually a better idea of how to change what is happening in our lives. And that's done obviously through taking the assessments, figuring these out. So if you would like any assessment, doesn't bind you, but if you would like to hear what the assessments do, what they can tell you, just type in assessment and someone will contact you about that as well. Two of them, one is Play Attention, and on the Play Attention website itself, but the others are independent that we also carry, so they will help you. It'll give you a lot of information. So again, you just have to type in the word assessment. So the end goal of this webinar right now was to talk about how we foster strong executive function. And that's what we'll go into right now. We'll explore right now. Executive function, strong executive function, starts with positive relationships. You know, I was at the dentist's office yesterday, and you know, here the pictures of a family. The gray-haired fellow may be a grandfather, and it may be his daughter in the back with her kids. And this family circle is where we start strong executive function. They are watching you. They are learning from you. The fact that all these folks got together and said, hey, let's go to the pumpkin patch. Halloween's coming up. And we'll plan a trip. We'll plan a trip where we can organize our schedules to go to the pumpkin patch. We'll learn about pumpkins, and they have fun things to explore at the pumpkin patch. So you're showing them you're able to plan and organize, and then you're initiating the task. They're watching you, and it's so simple. I mentioned I was at the dentist's office yesterday, and my hygienist was telling me about her granddaughter, and that her granddaughter, they have a very big barn. They live in the country, and the doors to the barn are usually locked. And the little daughter, who's 2 years old, loves to push on them and listen to that sound. And so her grandfather walked up on her while she was pushing that door, and she looked over her shoulder and she goes, no. And then he stepped back and she pushed again, and she was listening to the sound. And then Grandpa walked up and she goes, no. And so it became a game. Now, that was teaching her that she had some control, some internal control, right? She was taking charge of her life, and it was gamified with Grandpa, and she was listening to it. And he explained to her what vibration meant. And vibration makes sound. So even though I know these seems these little times that you spend together just like this seem minor, they have a huge impact on executive function. I hope this makes sense. It starts at the earliest point in childhood, and that's where they're learned or they're not learned. So if you have this from family members in the community, you can support each other. You can support your child's efforts. And of course, I've said this over and over again at this point, you can model skills. And that engages them to practice activities that allows them to get these skills. I'll give you another good example. How many people here have played Simon Says? Hands up if you played. That's great. It's good to know people still do that. When I was a school teacher, when we were out on the playground, I would ask whoever wanted to play to come play, and we'd do Simon Says. I had my class and other classes lined up to do Simon Says. They absolutely loved it. And what does that teach? What executive function skills does that teach? Obviously, it's good listening skills, and it is good attention skills, and it's good impulse control, because I'm going, put your hands on your shoulders, put your hands on your, or Simon Says, put your hands on your head, put your hands on your shoulders. You're out. Simon Says, clap your hands. Simon Says, hands up. Simon Says, hands down, hands up. And all of a sudden you're out. It really makes them engage, and it is working on executive function. And if you lose, you go out without a big fuss. It teaches emotion control. So doing this allows them to learn the skills, and it makes them more independent because they're confident in their ability to get along with other people and play and understand the roles. The other issue here is to limit environmental stressors. Now, there is no way that we could limit how much stress COVID provided over the last couple of years. Fortunately, we are not in that any longer, and that stress levels are going down. But remember, stressors can be my tablet or my phone, depending on how much time I'm spending on it. If we limit those, we have a better chance of teaching the skills and having them learn the skills to maintain over time. You want to use effective praise. And effective praise is very, very important. We don't praise them just for showing up. We praise them by telling them about how we appreciate the effort. We need them to show us effort, not just showing up. The fact that they just showed up and did nothing, didn't participate, didn't do anything, well, didn't do much. But if the effort is what we can discuss, and they actually tried to chip in, maybe weren't successful in whatever endeavor they had, you can say effective praise by saying, I really liked the way you did that. It showed me that you could control your emotions. I know that you weren't happy about it, but you took it very well, and we'll go back and try it again. What do you think about that? And it opens that discussion. So it's always important not to give them praise just because praise sounds like it's a good idea. It's nice to equate it with their effort, the amount of effort, and what their intention was. This is what is called effective praise. Then you also give them time to discuss with their peers about their habits, right? Their thoughts about what they did, whether it was effective study, how I did well at playing this, how I learned to tie my shoe. Just listening to the way someone else's mind operates makes me pay attention. It makes me formulate thought on my own. It helps me plan and organize and build those cognitive functions. And I know, remember, I keep saying this all sounds minor. It is not minor. The fact that we have strongly moved away from being able to teach these skills, right? How many times do you see kids playing outdoors unless it's a guided practice? How many times do you see them going outside and building a fort? going outside and just riding bikes with their friends. They'd rather be inside playing video games. So they're not given the space and time much anymore. Now, this depends on where you live. Sometimes I live out in the country, and so the country folks still, those kids ride bikes, they go out and play. Mom chases them out of the house. If we're more in urban areas, then typically we're on our phones, we're on our laptops, we're on our tablets, and we're playing video games. And this is very common, but it's not necessarily good. Remember this one thing, if you learned anything today, super important. Observational learning, it's the earliest form of learning. That means what your child picks up first is from you and the other parent. It's from grandma and grandpa. It's from whoever is closest to them initially. They're watching. And if you're presenting skills to them, like being on your cell phone all the time and not off your cell phone when you're with them, it is distracting for you and it's teaching them those same skill sets. So it's time that we internally, we have to self-check, we have to self-monitor, which is one of those skills of executive function, and make certain that we are not doing that. So do your homework alongside your child. That's a good modeling skill. Use a calendar with your child and give yourselves reminders. Hey, the fair is opening. Well, this is a country thing, isn't it? The fair is opening this Friday. Let's put it down. Maybe we can go. Would you like to go? You're planning, you're teaching planning. Make certain that you're prompt and on time as often as possible because they're watching. If you're late, consistently late, you can bet that your child pretty much will be consistently late. Avoid procrastination because if you're avoiding it, you can teach them how to start a task. Talk about how you resolved a particular issue. Let them hear your strategies on how you planned to make certain everything went okay during this particular issue, how you resolved it. And if something goes wrong, accept it gracefully because remember, they're watching you. This is where they learn those skills. If you have an emotional outburst because of it, you can bet that they're going to learn that. They're going to show it later. They'll present it later. This is very important and it's very easy to do, but it does mean that you have to take time with your child or even with your better half, your spouse, your partner, your students, if you're a teacher. Allow them to practice these skills and make these engagements, put these engagements, plan these engagements, these activities, plan them that allow them to practice these skills. Just playing board games, Monopoly, right? Scrabble teaches great skills. Monopoly teaches great skills. They're not as exciting as watching Grand Theft Auto or whatever kids are playing today, Fortnite, but they do teach strategy and kids generally still love them. Those games are still selling. Cooking is a great place to teach all of these skills. Measuring, planning, putting it all together correctly, self-checking to make certain my measurement is correct. All those kinds of things. Absolutely a great way to do it. And you're having to do it anyway. But you can model all of these skills. Talent night is always a great night because you could do a magic trick. You could practice your singing. Maybe that's your talent. Maybe you show them a new dance move. Maybe, and your child is showing you their latest dance move. All of these things teach executive function skills. Practicing music, the ability to stay in time, to pay attention, to read music, to engage my mind to do that, all teach executive function skills. Magic tricks are great because most children are quite interested in magic. And to learn these magic tricks and teach them so that they can present it to an audience, to plan and organize, and self-check to make certain everything's going to go right, executive function skills. And learning sports like taking yoga or taekwondo, playing soccer, teaches them to get organized, to play as a team, to not be impulsive, to self-check to make certain I'm in the right space where I'm supposed to be. All of these things are implied. They're in these games. So these are great ways to do it. They don't cost you anything except maybe a little bit of your time. So to guide them to being independent so they can do these things independently, you want to make certain that your students are motivated for learning. I did this constantly when I was in the classroom. I brought in experiment after experiment. We made, if you've ever heard of this stuff, goop. Um, it's also like what they show in Nickelodeon. I can't remember what they call it, but when they pour the green glop on everybody, we can make that very easily. It's very inexpensive. Kids love it. It teaches about chemical change, and it shows us how to plan, how to measure, how to self-check to make certain my measurements are right. Kids loved it. We made rockets, then we blasted them off into the sky. Not very expensive, but so much fun. And I still have students that I had 30 years ago meeting with me and saying, I had the best year. I learned so much. They learned more than I could even tell them because they were learning along with science and math and all the other crazy things that we were learning. They were learning executive function skills, and that was the plan. Coach students to set goals and develop a plan for learning. This is really important because when was the last time you sat down and said, hey, what is your goal this year? What do you want out of this year? What would you like to get? What's going to help you in your later life? Now, that may be not appropriate if they're very, very young, but you can phrase it into a point with, what would you like to accomplish this year? Would you like to get to the soccer team, or would you like to play goalie? What would you like to do? All of these things are super, super important. And life goes by so quickly that we miss these opportunities. So it's very important. And then teach students to self-assess, right? Self-monitor, so that they can continuously self-check and make certain they're doing things the right way. They're not missing steps. This is quite important. Even remember, even though they seem minor, they affect the whole working of the entire orchestra if one of them doesn't happen correctly. That's, if you leave with anything today, that's one of the things you should leave with. Limit those stressors. The less they're stressed, the better their brain is able to absorb. Limit environmental stressors. The less stress, the more they will absorb. Play attention. That's one of the things that we do. We teach executive function skills. And the cool thing about it is it's done with neurotech. You wear this little armband on your arm. I think I have one here. I do have one here. You wear one of these little armbands on your arm, and you're able to control the computer by mind alone, by your attention. You move things, you develop executive function skills. That's one of the things that we do. And all of them, all of these executive function skills, cognitive exercise there, are there to promote strong executive function. I do want to talk to you while you're here just briefly. They are doing a back to school bundle, which will save hundreds and hundreds. I think it's over $400 in savings with the back to school Brain Boost bundle. So if you're interested in that, you can write in bundle. Someone would call you and talk to you about that. But right now, this is one of the biggest savings that they offer per year. And it is a lot of money off because they bundle so much in the same package for a lot less money. So that if you'd like that, just type in bundle and someone will call you about that. You can talk to them about it. So you can take the assessments. Remember, if you wanted an assessment, you can just type in assessment. Someone will call you about it. If you want a one-to-one consultation to see how play attention could work for you, type in consultation. And if you're interested in the back to school Brain Boost bundle, which would save you a fortune, you can just type in Brain Boost or bundle, and someone will talk to you about that. Are there any questions? We're almost out of time. Are there any questions that I might answer before we leave? Because if there are, type them in, and I will do my best to answer your question. All right. Well, a few are coming in. Okay. Amy is asking me, are there any other ways to teach executive function other than what I talked about tonight? Okay, other than what Peter talked about. So yes, anytime that you can get them into a sport, and we talked just a little bit about this, soccer practice, all of these kinds of things really do teach those type of skills. Now, if they are really deficit, I actually had children that I knew that were trying to play baseball, and they had ADHD. And so they'd be in the outfield and they'd be staring around, and the coach was constantly yelling at them. So while that could help them, constantly having that kind of coaching is not a good thing. But generally, if they're organized programs and the child feels like it is a good fit where no one's yelling at them, it's a very good way to learn them. And again, remember, if you walk away with anything, remember from earliest childhood on, they are studying you. So present also to them the right executive functions, and they'll get it as well. All right. Okay. Paula said, my daughter is often daydreaming during her homework. Is there a way to help her focus? Yes, absolutely. Again, play attention is probably the best way to do that, because play attention actually teaches them what attention is, how to control it, how it applies to executive function, and all of the other skills. That it's the best, absolutely. And that's why I developed it. It was the absolute, and I based it off of what NASA was doing to train astronauts, how to stay attentive in space when they're either very bored, that's called hypoarousal, or they're overly excited because something's going wrong, that's hyperarousal. And so that's how we actually, I developed that very early on. That's one of the best ways to do it. But if you want to try to do something just for homework, you might cut it down. Here's a small strategy you could try, Paula. Cut the homework assignment down so that it is in pieces that she don't feel too big. So if it's a 20-minute assignment, cut it into 5-minute segments. Let's do this over the next 5 minutes, and then we take a break. Then you come back to it, you do another 5 or 10 minutes, you take a break. Because sometimes it's just daunting if they have executive function problems to be able to do it all at one time. I hope that makes sense. All right, we are totally out of time. Thank you again. Take care, everyone. We'll talk to you soon.